Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, Diary of Fiction. Today we have probably the most exciting video that I'm ever gonna film because we're going to be talking about my all-time favorite books. I am so excited to talk about these. These books are literally my babies. They're everything to me. But because I can talk about them for years and years and years, I will do my best to keep this short and sweet. I don't know how long this video is going to be. Hopefully not that long, but I am so excited. I have divided these books into 5 different categories and I have them all written down on my notebook. The first category, which is nostalgic reads. So this is self-explanatory. These are books that I read years and years ago and that I still love to this day because of the nostalgia that they bring me. Then we have 6-star reads. These are just like top tier, best of the best books that I've read. There's not many. There's only 3 books in this category. And the third category is recent favorites. So these are obviously favorite books that I've read recently as opposed to like the nostalgic reads. Then we have I'll always recommend. So these are books that I feel like whenever somebody comes up to me and they ask for a recommendation, I would choose one of these books most likely. And then finally for our 5th category, we have honorable mentions. And I decided to add this because these are not necessarily all-time favorite books, but they still had some sort of impact on me that I wanted to share. So those are all the books that I will be talking about today. Let's get into it. So I'm gonna start off with my nostalgic favorites, and first I have to start with none other than Percy Jackson, The Lighting Thief by Riordan, because this book has one of the most precious places in my heart just because of how much it meant to me. I found this book kind of randomly because a family member of mine had found out how much I love reading and they decided to take me to a bookstore and choose a book. And back then, you know, you walked into a bookstore and every book was a mystery. I feel like today I walk into a bookstore and I know pretty much every book that is there, but I don't know what about this book grabbed my attention and I decided to get it, and I'm so glad that I did because I brought it home, finished it so fast. I remember staying up reading it and it was like the first like kind of like series that I obsessed over. I immediately read the rest of the series and fell in love. It just became sort of like this new personality where I would tell all of my friends, you have to read Percy Jackson, you have to read Percy Jackson. And actually I didn't have a lot of people to talk about this series with, so it actually led me onto searching up on YouTube book recommendations and finding out a Booktube's book recommendations video and eventually finding what is now more known as Booktube. Back then, you know, it wasn't that big and I feel like I was really embarrassed to tell people, you know, I'm watching YouTube videos on books. But Sasha had this video with book recommendations that really spoke to me. Her video in itself resonated with me because of how unafraid she was to share how much she loved books. I remember finding the video and running up to my dad and telling him, look at this video of this girl talking about books. She loves books the same way that I do. And my dad actually turned around and asked me, when are you gonna make your own channel? So if you were wondering what brought me here, what made me want to start a booktube channel, it's been on the making for over 10 years. This idea and this big dream of mine ever since I found that video and I saw safe space for readers could exist, you know, online. That is sort of how it all started with me. I feel like Percy Jackson had that like key moment in my reading journey that I treasure with my entire life. So I love Percy Jackson and I need to reread the series soon. And finding Booktube obviously led me into reading these next few books that I'm going to be talking about now. First we have City of Bones by Cassandra Clare, which is the first book in the Mortal Instruments, and I'm choosing this book specifically because obviously it's the first one and I feel like it's my favorite. It's the one that I've reread the most. This series just gives me so much comfort. It gives me the same comfort that rewatching old like 2000s, early 2000s shows gives me, like Vampire Diaries, Teen Wolf, you know, if you know, you know. Like this is the best, like kind of like supernatural urban fantasy series. I feel like I need more of these type of books where there's like vampires, there's werewolves, obviously there's shadow hunters who basically just fight demons. Clare, your main character, is drawn into this world, and I feel like even though this first book, if I'm honest, like there's a lot of things that did not age well, but no matter what, this is still a favorite of mine just because of the comfort that it brings me. The way that Cassandra Clare writes characters, it really truly feels like you know them. So The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare. And then we have Champion by Marie Lu, which is the 3rd book in the Legend trilogy, and I'm choosing this one specifically because it wrecked me. This book destroyed me, and the funny thing is that I actually got spoiled right before getting to the ending because I don't know why I wanted to search up fan art when I was about to finish the trilogy, but I did and I got spoiled. Regardless, this book blew my mind. Obviously I can't talk about it too much because it's the 3rd book in a trilogy, but Legend in general, it's such an amazing dystopian trilogy that I loved. It has like some romance in it as well because you're following Day and June, both of their perspectives. June is actually looking for the person responsible for killing her brother, and there is this wanted criminal whose name is Day, our other perspective, and she thinks that it's him who is responsible for it. So she's gonna go look after him. They're gonna cross paths, and she's actually not gonna know that he is Day, and they might fall in love. And so I feel like it's such a great premise, very action-packed, very fast-paced, just overall an amazing trilogy that I haven't reread and I should reread soon. And I love this. I love seeing and revisiting my annotations from a long time ago. And finally, for my nostalgic favorites, we have Cinder by Marissa Meyer, which I've talked about this series before. I absolutely love the Lunar Chronicles. I still haven't read the last book. I still haven't. But I am planning on probably maybe making a video reading that last book because it's such a long book that I feel like I need to document the feeling of ending such a nostalgic series that has been with me for so many years now since I've been reading it throughout the years. Cinder, though, is the one that I'm holding up because this first book was so different and unlike anything else I had ever read. It is a Cinderella retelling, but we're following Cinder, who is actually a cyborg. It has a little bit of dystopian vibes as well. There's sort of like a play going on. I just really love Cinderella retellings in general, but I had never expected to love like a sci-fi Cinderella retelling. And the rest of the books get even better because now you get introduced to more characters. The second one is Little Red Riding Hood, the third one is Rapunzel, and then the fourth one is Snow White. They have the biggest and the best like found family. It's sort of like that feeling if you like the Avengers, when you see them all come together. That's sort of that same feeling that I get when I read this books. It's like, oh my god, like it's so beautiful, it's so stunning. These books actually have some of the best romance I've also read because although I do say that I don't like romance, I mean contemporary romance. I do love romance on sci-fi, on my fantasy books. So an amazing series. I feel like this one holds up to this day. And I met Marissa Meyer and she signed my book. Yeah, transitioning on to my 6-star reads. I'm looking at one of them right now, and that is Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Listen, I remember reading this book and being so obsessed over it. Like, look at how many annotations this book has. The pages are also quite yellow, but I remember how much these books makes me feel. I love this even more than I loved Six of Crows. I feel like this one we got to know the characters a lot more and we got to just feel a lot more. And I can't talk too much about it obviously because it's the second book in the series, but I do want to make maybe like a reading vlog of the Six of Crows series and just experience all of these feelings again with you all. So let me know if you would want to see that spoiler free or with spoilers. Let me know what you think. It's such a beautiful beautiful book. Love the way that Leigh Bardugo wrote these characters and the way I just absolutely fell in love with all of them. Actually, my favorite character was Jesper, and I actually found this annotation and it says, can you see it? It says, haha, I love Jesper. So cute. I just remember how much it meant to me at the time that I read it, which was also during the pandemic, so such a special place in my heart. I love it so much. So it is actually a few days later now because the day that I was filming it was really hot and I need to start checking the weather before I film sit down videos, but we're continuing the video now and we left off at my 6-star reads. And my next 6-star read is a book that I actually read this year and absolutely loved, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is the first book by R.F. Kuang that I've read so far, and I'm glad that it's my first book because it's, I think, my favorite out of all the ones that I've read by her. I've already read Yellowface and I've already read The Puppy War. Both of those books are also amazing books, and R.F. Kuang is definitely on her way to become my favorite author. If not, she is already one of my favorite authors, but this book spoke to me in a way no other book had in the past. I think this to me is like core dark academia. This is the definition of dark academia for me and what dark academia I think should be. There's so much discussion in this book about colonialism and racism, sexism. There are so many conversations that this book brings up that I think are really important to include in the dark academia genre, and the perspectives that you get from this book are also really important. This book is basically a historical fiction with some fantasy elements. It's not very heavy on the fantasy, but we're following our main character Robin, and it is set during the 1830s. He is from China and his family just passed away from cholera, and he's taken to England by a British professor who basically gives him all the resources he needs and teaches him languages so that he can get accepted into the most prestigious institution of translation, Babel. And at Babel, it's where you find out a little bit more about the magic system, which has to do with silver working. following, there are this magical silver bars that basically have a word on one side and the translation on its back, and when it's said out loud, the magic sort of comes with what is lost in translation when you say those words, because whenever you want to translate something, there's always a meaning that's lost. And I think the concept and idea of that is so genius to include as the magical system in a book, especially because of the themes that it explores and the power of language and the discussion on colonialism. Like, there is so much in this book, and the ending absolutely broke me. I feel like this is the ending that I felt most in my heart. Like, it destroyed me and had me staring at a wall. Like, nothing will compare to what the ending of this book felt. It is amazing, and I think at times it could feel a little bit dense, but it is worth pushing through. And yeah, just please read it. Please read it. I know it's a little bit intimidating, but it's completely worth it. My next 6-star read, I was in between putting this book in the nostalgic read section because it is definitely a nostalgic book, but I think the way this book had an impact on me is much greater than just a nostalgic book, and that is The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. Who remembers this series? Let me know if you read the Raven Cycle, because I absolutely love this series. So the reason why this book is on here is because I feel like it introduced me to, it was the first time that I felt like I was reading something that was meant for me. I realized how much I really love character-driven stories. Like in this one, we're following our main character Blue, and she comes from a family of psychics. And Blue is warned by her family that she is going to kill her first kiss. And then there are this group of boys, the Raven Boys, who go to this like prestigious school, and you get to see them and learn about their background, their family story, and like what they're going through, and you care so much about them. And that was my favorite part of the book. Also the magical realism side of it and the writing style, because this was the first time that I felt like I was reading writing that I felt really connected to, and I noticed the writing. I noticed how beautiful writing could be. It's very much like dreamy. I just recommend picking up this book. If you also like the idea of like dreams and dreams within dreams and like that sort of like magical aspect, and also found family, read this book. I need to reread the series, and I know I'm saying that for every single series, but I would love to at some point make a video rereading the series, either separately, individually, or like all together. I don't know how, but I definitely want to reread these books and experience them again. So The Raven Boys. And this one is also wrapped because I guess I wanted to preserve the book forever. Now we're gonna go on to my recent reads, and these first two books are both Dark Academia books that I talk about in my Dark Academia book recommendations video if you want to watch that as well, because it has reactions to some of the endings of these books. Bunny by Mona Awad is the first one that I want to talk about because this book, it blew my mind. The ending of this book had my jaw dropped. Like, I know that this is sort of a weird book, and it is not necessarily for everybody. It is always described as a weird book or like a fever dream book, which I completely agree with. I feel like Mona Awad writes in such a unique way. In this book, we're following Samantha, and she's a graduate student studying creative writing or fiction writing. In her cohort, there are this group of girls. They call themselves Bunny, and it is sort of like the Barbie movie where they say to each other like, hi Barbie, but it's like, hi Bunny, hi Bunny. And our main character feels very isolated because she doesn't feel like she relates to that group of girls. She very much feels like on the side. She can't really connect with her cohort. She doesn't really like them as much until one day she gets invited to one of their events and gets pulled into that world. It is so interesting how the writing style sort of describes her kind of getting drawn into this world. This book is sort of a combination of Mean Girls and Scream Queens. Like, that's my best way to describe it. It does have some horror elements and some dark humor in it. There's not much to say because I feel like this is a book that you need to experience on your own. So I still highly recommend this book. It was such a big surprise for me, and out of the two books that I've read by Mona Awad, this one and Allswell, this one is my favorite, but I still also really recommend Allswell. One thing I forgot to add is that this book on the surface level is all the things that I described, but I feel like the underlining message of it is so much deeper than that. It's at its core a little bit more about like loneliness and feeling like an outsider. So yeah, highly recommend. The next book that I want to talk about is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid, and you're probably tired of hearing me talk about this book already, but I really love this book. It is such an atmospheric read, especially right now in fall. I think it's perfect because it sets the scene really beautifully. The writing is wonderful. I think my favorite book in terms of writing of this year that I've read, you can really vividly picture everything in your head. The whole scenery, where we're at, the weather, it's like very like that like misty, foggy climate, and I absolutely love it. We're following our main character Effie, and she's an architecture student, but she actually wants to study literature, except in this world, women aren't allowed to study literature. Ever since she was younger, she's been hunted by these visions of this demon king, and she's particularly drawn to this story. And when the author of this story passes away, his family basically puts on a contest for an architecture student to redesign his house. So obviously, since she's the main character, she's gonna win this contest and she's gonna go to his house. And when she's there, she's also gonna meet an academic rival. Yeah, and the story sort of goes on from there. There is a really beautiful message in the story in itself, and also a very cute romance. Just the scenery of it all, it's like very eerie, very dark, and gives off that like haunted mansion vibe. I don't know, it's just really, really good, and I highly, highly recommend. And the third and final book in this category is none other than the book that I have literally 3 editions of, and that is Daughter of Smoke and Bone. These are literally the same edition of the same book. Yes, this is when I discovered that I literally have a problem when it comes to favorite books. I feel like for all of these books in this list, I would probably get more than 1 edition if I could. I've just been lucky to find cool editions for this book in particular, and my favorite so far, like we have this one, I have it in Spanish as well, and then this one, which is my favorite one, and I recently hauled this in another video. So I'm gonna hold up this one. This is the first book in a trilogy which came out years ago. This is one of like the OG booktube books series that came out a while ago, and I've been meaning to read, but I never got to. And I honestly, when I picked it up, I took the risk, because some of the early 2000s books I feel like I could not love anymore. I probably have outgrown a lot of them, and I was scared to pick this one up and that it would feel a little bit like maybe like cringe or cheesy, but no, it was actually such a nice nostalgic experience because it kind of brought me back to the first time that I read The Mortal Instruments. It gave me sort of that same feeling. So if you've been wanting to read a series that feels like that and you haven't read this yet, I would recommend, because it does give off like those like early 2000s nostalgic feels, but it's fresh and new and a fresh new story. So that's what I really enjoyed. And this book in particular, the first one, is my favorite out of the 3. I'm currently reading the 3rd book, but the first book feels a lot more whimsical than the rest of the series. The series then becomes a little bit darker. I feel like there are some content warnings for the rest of the trilogy since this is a young adult book. The story basically starts off with our main character Blue, and she has been raised by chimeras, and she lives in the normal world. She goes to high school, has a normal life, has her best friend, which by the way, I really love the friendship aspect in this book. But she goes back home and she has been raised by chimeras, and she actually collects teeth for her guardian, whose name is Brimstone, and she travels through like magical doors collecting teeth for him. That's like the premise of it, and she just tries to figure out, you know, her own identity and who she is, and more about like her own story and why she's so different from like other people, because she has blue hair and like marks on her body. I still really recommend checking out the series. I feel like if you like Angel Apocalypse books, you might really like this. And finally, we're gonna go to books I'll always recommend, which are sort of a mixture between like books I'll always recommend and then like these are also recent reads, recent favorites. So it kind of goes, you know, both ways. I feel like Bunny, for example, wasn't a book that I could put on books I'll always recommend because I think it's not for everybody, but these in particular I feel like are books that I'm always going to think about first whenever someone asks for a recommendation. Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is one of the best dystopian books I've ever read, and I love dystopian books. If you have more dystopian book recommendations, please give them to me because I want to read more dystopian books. This was so interesting. So basically, in this world, there are artificial friends, also called AFs. They are given to children to keep them company, and we're following literally the perspective of one of these artificial friends. Her name is Clara, and Clara is at the store where they sell these artificial friends, and she's hoping for a family to choose her so she can go with them, and she has so much faith in humanity. And we do follow her journey when she comes into contact with humans for the first time and her observations. It's so interesting to see her perspective of humans and humanity, because what this book is trying to explore is what does it mean to love. It's such a beautiful story that I also had such a good time reading because there were a lot of things that I felt were more left for interpretation of the reader for you to theorize on, or at least that's what I did. That was my experience reading the book. I remember talking to my boyfriend about the book and just telling him I think this is going to happen, or I think this is what this means, and that was like the interesting part part about it, the commentary that this book offers on humanity, and it's overall super, super interesting. I highly, highly recommend. I love this book, and I actually found it at a free little library. The next book that I have is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, and this is a wonderful, wonderful novel that I read to the library first, and I loved it so much that I decided to get my own copy of the book. We're basically following a Chinese American family in the 1970s in Ohio, and it's a very dark story. In the first chapter, the family just found their daughter's body at a lake, and it sort of takes you back into the past to see how it all led up to that. We're following the story of the parents and what they went through and their own journey, how they experienced a lot of racism, discrimination, and how they were unable to fulfill their own dreams, and how that sort of pressure is passed on to the next generation and the impact that that has on their children. It's such an important read that I highly recommend reading. Obviously, check content warnings for this first, but it's one of the best books I've read, so yeah, I highly recommend. And I need to read Little Fires Everywhere, which is the other book by the same author that has a TV show. I forgot to tell you about two very important books, which are both young adult contemporary novels. I don't typically gravitate towards contemporary, but these are two books that I feel like I'm really grateful that I got to read because I actually really, really love them. The first one is The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I highly recommend listening to the audio of this book because it's narrated by Elizabeth Acevedo herself, and the way she narrates the story, she really does a great job at conveying all of these strong emotions that this book comes with, especially because this book is actually written in verse, so like a poem, and the way that it is narrated really speaks to your heart. It is a coming of age story where we're following Xiomara, and Xiomara is really struggling to be understood by her mother. She's really struggling back home, and she's also navigating her teenage years. It's about her like finding her own voice while also dealing with a lot of other things like self-love, relationships, and the beautiful message, how many times have I said beautiful, behind this story is Xiomara sort of finding her own voice through slam poetry. It's just such a great book, and I highly, highly recommend picking it up. It is definitely very empowering. I really, really love this book, so highly, highly recommend it. And the next book that I have, I don't have right now, but I will include a clip of it because it has a lot of annotations, and also the physical copy in itself, it's very like artsy and has like some drawings in it because the book itself does talk about art, and that is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This was again another beautiful coming of age story, but it is more focused on like the family aspect. You're following two twins, and it's sort of that like present past timeline story where in the present these two twins don't really speak to each other anymore, which is really sad. Something happened in the past that kind of made them both go their own separate ways, and you kind of go back and forth in between the timelines, I believe, from what I remember, discovering what really happened between them. And again, it really has to do with like family dynamics, family relationships, going through hard times. This book I feel like made me feel so much so much. It is definitely a little bit more on the sad side, but I highly, highly recommend. Again, it's also very artsy, which really spoke to me as somebody who's also an artist, and it has a lot of references to art, and it uses art in a way to express like their own feelings, what they're going through, and there's so many beautiful quotes in that book. So again, highly, highly recommend both of these young adult books. I do have two honorable mentions that I would like to talk about. These are not necessarily like my all-time favorite books, but they are two books that I think had a big impact on me that I still wanted to talk about. The first one is a little bit silly because it is The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Now, the reason why this book is here is because I never finished the series. If I would have finished the series, I feel like it would have probably been in the nostalgic reads category, but because I didn't, I can't really put it as my all-time favorite book because I don't know if I loved the entire series. But this book in particular was one of the first like young adult, sort of like sci-fi, I don't even know what, is it dystopian? I don't even know what the genre of this book is, but you're following kids with like supernatural abilities, or like they randomly get supernatural abilities. And I remember really loving this book, and I also remember crying during this book. So I think hopefully one day I get to reread this book because I really want to find out how the story ended. But that's why it's here, because I think it's such a throwback to back in the days, and that I still feel like I have such a core memory of reading this book, so I still wanted to include it on this list. Finally, we have a very well-known book as my honorable mention. Let me bring it, and that is The Very Secret Life of Addie LaRue. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Look at that. That is literally why it's here. So this book, I think I read this book as soon as it released, and I am so bad at reading books as soon as they release, especially because hardcovers tend to be a lot more expensive. But for this book in particular, I was so excited because I had already read books by B.E. Schwab, absolutely love her writing, but I was so impressed by her writing in this book. In fact, when I first read the first few lines, I had the idea that this book was going to be my all-time favorite book. Eventually, I feel like the story felt a little bit flat for me. I didn't really like where the book ended up at, and just the delivery of Addie's journey. But the character that stood out to me was actually Henry. And I remember actually on Goodreads, I put The Invisible Life of Henry. That's literally what I put on Goodreads. I think I heard somewhere that B.E. Schwab had put more of herself into Henry's character. And if so, I feel like you could really tell. Henry is a character who is lost in his 20s, basically. There's something so special about that. It was just the way that that part of the story and that part of his character was described that I think at the time where I read it was comforting, but also very nice to read about, and I did not expect that at all. So that's why I feel like this book, even though there were some things that I didn't absolutely love about it, I still really have a special place for it in my heart. I definitely want to reread it to see what I would think today, but again, it's so annotated. There were a lot of moments where I connected with this story, or with Henry, so The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. And that is all of my absolute favorite books ever so far as of today. I definitely know that this list is going to continue growing, and that is exactly why I wanted to make this video, because I'm pretty sure now that I have a booktube channel, I know that I'm going to be reading so many books, especially books that I've been meaning to read for a while, that I'm hoping or have the expectation are going to be all-time favorites or 5-star reads. So I definitely know that this list is going to grow, and I cannot wait for that, because the purpose of me reading so much is so that I can find new favorite books. There's nothing better than that feeling. So hopefully in the future I can make an updated video with new favorite books and just keep on making those videos. I think it would be really interesting to see how my taste and everything just changes throughout the years. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you made it all the way to the end of this video, you can leave me this emoji in the comments. I am so thankful for you being here. Thank you so much. I was so happy to make this video, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye!